Hello, once again, this is Dr. Palmer here. Today we're going to be talking about the nominating process as we begin our new section on the electoral process. This is Chapter 7. Our objectives for this video is we're going to explain why the nominating process is a critical first step in the election process. We're going to describe self-announcement, the caucus, and the convention as nominating methods. We'll discuss the direct primary as the principal nominating method used in the United States today. We'll help you understand why some candidates use the petition as a nominating device. Here's your vocabulary. You should know the following: nomination, general election, caucus, direct primary, closed primary, open primary, blanket primary, runoff primary, and nonpartisan election. Suppose your teacher stood in front of the class and said, "Here's a $1,000 bill. Who'd like to have it?" You and everyone else in the room. You'd all probably say, or at least think, "Me." Suppose the teacher then said, "Okay, we'll hold an election. The person who wins the most votes gets the money." What would happen? If the election were held immediately, it's likely that each member of the class would vote for himself or herself. A few might vote for a friend. Almost certainly, however, the election would end in a tie. No one would win the money. But suppose the teacher said, "We'll hold the election tomorrow." What do you think would happen then? As you think about the answer to that question, you begin to get a sense of the practical importance of the nominating process, the first step in the process of electing candidates to office. The nominating process is the process of candidate selection. Nomination, the naming of those who will seek office, is a critically important step in the election process. You've already seen two major illustrations of the significance of nomination process. In Chapter 5, you learned about the making of nominations, one as a prime function of political parties in the United States, and two as a leading reason for the decentralized nature of the two major parties. The nominating process also has a very real impact on the exercise of the right to vote. In the typical election in this country, voters can make only one of two choices for each office on the ballot. They can vote the Republican or they can vote the Democratic candidate. This is another way of saying that we have a two-party system in the United States. It is also another way to say that the nominating stage is a critically important part of the electoral process. Those who make nominations place real, very practical limits on the choices that voters can make in an election. In one-party constituencies, those areas where one party regularly wins elections, the nominating process is usually the only point at which there is any real contest for a public office. Once the dominant party has made its nomination, the general election is a little more than a formality. Dictatorial regimes point up the importance of the nominating process. Many of them hold general elections, regularly scheduled elections at which voters make the final selection of office holders, much as democracies do. But typically, the ballots used in those elections list only one candidate for each office, the candidate of the ruling clique, and those candidates regularly win with majorities approaching 100%. There are 5 ways in which nominations are made in the United States. They include self-announcement, the caucus method, conventions, direct primaries, and petitions. Self-announcement is the oldest form of the nominating process in American politics. First used in colonial times, it is often found at the small town and rural levels in many parts of the country. The method is quite simple. A person who wants to run for office simply announces that fact. Modesty or local custom may dictate that someone else make the candidate's announcement, but still, the process amounts to the same thing. Self-announcement is sometimes used by someone who failed to win a regular party nomination or by someone unhappy with the party's choice. Note that whenever a write-in candidate appears in an election, the self-announcement process has been used. In recent history, 4 prominent presidential contenders have made use of the process. George Wallace, who declared himself to be the American Independent Party's nominee in 1968, The independent candidates Eugene McCarthy in 1976, and John Anderson in 1980, and Ross Perot in 1992. As a nominating device, a caucus is a group of like-minded people who meet to select the candidates they will support in an upcoming election. The first caucus nominations were made towards the end of the colonial period, probably in Boston in the mid-1720s. One of the earliest descriptions of a caucus can be found in John Adams' diary, in an entry he made in February 1763. This day learn that the caucus club meets at certain times in the garret of Tom Dawes, the adjutant of the Boston regiment. He has a large house, and he has a movable partition in his garret, which he takes down, and the whole club meets in one room. There they smoke tobacco till you cannot see from one end of the garret to the other. There they drink flip, I suppose, and they choose a moderator, who puts questions to the vote regularly, and select men, assessors, collectors, wardens, fire wards, and representatives are regularly chosen before they are chosen in the town. The Works of John Adams, 1856. Originally, the caucus was a private meeting consisting of a few influential figures in the community. As political parties appeared in the late 1700s, they soon took over the device and began to broaden the membership of the caucus. The coming of independence brought the need to nominate candidates for state offices, governor, lieutenant governor, and others above the local level. The Legislative Caucus, a meeting of a party's members in the state legislature, took on the job. At the national level, both the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans in Congress were, by 1800s, choosing their presidential and vice presidential candidates through the Congressional Caucus. The legislative and congressional caucuses were quite practical in their day. Transportation and communication were difficult at best. Since legislators already gathered regularly in Central Place, it made sense for them to take on the nominating responsibility. The spread of democracy, especially in the newer states on the frontier, spurred opposition to caucuses, however. More and more people condemned them for their closed, unrepresentative character. Criticism of the caucus reached its peak in the early 1820s. The supporters of three of the leading contenders for the presidency in 1824, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and John Quincy Adams, boycotted the Democratic-Republicans' congressional caucus that year. In fact, Jackson and his supporters made King Caucus a leading campaign issue. The other major aspirant, William H. Crawford of Georgia, became the caucus nominee at a meeting attended by fewer than one-third of the Democratic-Republican Party's members in Congress. Crawford ran a poor third in the Electoral College balloting in 1824, and the reign of King Caucus at the national level was ended. With its death in presidential politics, the caucus system soon withered at the state and local levels as well. The caucus is still used to make local nominations in some places, especially in New England. There, a caucus is open to all members of a party, and it only faintly resembles the original closed and private process. As the caucus method collapsed, the convention system took its place. The first national convention to nominate a presidential candidate was held by a minor party, the Anti-Masons, in Baltimore in 1831. The newly formed National Republican, soon to become Whig Party, also held a convention later the same year. The Democrats picked up the practice in 1832. All major party presidential nominees have been chosen by conventions ever since. By the 1840s, conventions had become the principal means for making nominations at every level in American politics. On paper, the convention process seems perfectly suited to representative government. A party's members meet in a local caucus to pick candidates for local offices and at the same time to select delegates to represent them at a county convention. At the county convention, the delegates nominate candidates for county offices and select delegates to the next rung on the convention ladder, usually the state convention. There, the delegates from the county conventions pick the party's nominees for governor and other statewide offices. State conventions also send delegates to the party's national convention, where the party selects its presidential and vice presidential candidates. In theory, the will of the party's rank-and-file membership is passed up through each of the representative levels. Practice soon pointed up the weaknesses of the theory, however, as party bosses found ways to manipulate the process. By playing with the selection of delegates, usually at the local levels, they soon dominated the entire system. As a result, the caliber of most conventions declined at all levels, especially during the late 1800s. How low some of them fell can be seen in this description of the Cook County, Illinois Convention in 1896. Quote, "Of the 723 delegates, those who had been on trial for murder numbered 17, sentenced to the penitentiary for murder or manslaughter and served sentence 7, served terms in the penitentiary for burglary 36, served terms in the penitentiary for picking pockets 2, served terms in the penitentiary for arson 1, jailbirds identified by detectives 84, keepers of gambling houses 7, keepers of houses of ill fame 2, convicted of mayhem 3, ex-prize fighters 11, pool room proprietors 2, saloon keepers 265, political employees 148, no occupation 71. Many people have hailed the change from caucus to convention as a major change for the better in American politics. The abuses of the new device soon dashed their hopes. By the 1870s, the convention system was itself under attack by a major source of evil in American politics. By the 1910s, the direct primary had replaced the convention in most states as the primary nominating method in American politics. A direct primary is an intra-party election. It is held within a party to pick that party's candidates for the general election. Wisconsin adopted the first statewide direct primary in 1903. Several other states soon followed its lead. Every state now makes at least some provision for its use. In most states, state law requires that the major parties use the primary to choose their candidates for the United States Senate and the House of Representatives, for the governor and all other state offices, and for most local offices as well. In a few states, however, different combinations of convention and primary are used to pick candidates for the top offices. In Michigan, for example, the major parties choose their candidates for the U.S. Senate and House, the governorship, and the state legislature in primaries. Nominees for lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and attorney general are picked by conventions. Although the primaries are party nominating elections, they are closely regulated by law in most states. The state usually sets the dates on which primaries are held, and it regularly conducts them too. The state, not the parties, provides polling places and election officials, registration lists and ballots, and other policies, and otherwise polices the process. Two basic forms of the direct primary are in use today. 1. The closed primary, and 2. The open primary. The major difference between the two lies in the answer to the question, who can vote in the party's primary? Only qualified voters who are party members, or any qualified voter? "26 states and the District of Columbia used the closed primary." A closed primary is a party nominating election in which only declared party members can vote. In most of the closed primary states, party membership is established by registration. When voters appear at the polling places on primary election day, their names are checked against the poll books, the lists of registered voters for each precinct. Each voter is then handed the ballot of the party in which he or she is registered. That voter can mark only that party's ballot. That is, he or she may vote only in that party's primary. The open primary is a party nominating election in which any qualified voter can take part. Although it is the form in which the direct primary first appeared, the open primary is now found in only 24 states. When voters go to their polling places in some open primary states, they are handed the ballots of each of the parties holding a primary election. Voters then pick the party primary in which they wish to participate in the privacy of the voting booth. In other open primary states, voters must ask for the ballot of the party in whose primary they want to participate. That is, voters must make a public, not a private choice of party before they enter the voting booth. Through 2000, 3 states used a different version of the open primary, the blanket primary, sometimes called the wide open primary. Washington adopted the first blanket primary law in 1935. Alaska followed suit in 1970, and California did so in 1996. In those 3 states, every voter received the same primary ballot, a long one containing the names of all contenders regardless of party, for each nomination to be made at the primary election. Voters could participate in the primary however they chose. They could confine themselves to one party's primary by voting to nominate only Democratic candidates, or instead only Republican candidates. Or they could switch back and forth between the party's primaries, voting to nominate a Democrat for one office, a Republican for another, and so on down the ballot. The Supreme Court ruled against the blanket primary in 2000, however. In Democratic Party of California versus Jones, it found that the blanket primary process violated the First Amendment's guarantee of the right of association. The court held that a state cannot force a political party to associate with outsiders, that is, with members of other parties or with independent voters, when it picks its candidates for public office. Quote, "In no area in the party's right to exclude is more important," said the court, "than in the process of selecting its nominees." Louisiana has yet another form of the open primary, which was not affected by the court's decision in Jones. Its unique open election law provides for what amounts to a combination primary and election. The names of all the people who seek nominations are listed by office on a single primary ballot. A contender who wins more than 50% of the primary votes wins the office. In these cases, the primary becomes the election. In contests where there is no major winner, the 2 top vote getters, regardless of party, face off in the general election. In response to the Supreme Court decision of Democratic Party of California versus Jones, Washington state voters passed Initiative 872 in 2004, which adopted the Louisiana-style nonpartisan blanket primary. While lower courts, following the ruling of California, struck down the initiative, the Washington Supreme Court ruled the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in March 18, 2008, in Washington State Grange versus Washington State Republican Party et al., that Initiative 872 was at least facially constitutional and could go into effect. In other words, Washington can follow the Louisiana model of nonpartisan blanket primaries. Closed versus open primaries. The 2 basic forms of the primary have caused arguments for decades. Those who favor the closed primary regularly make 3 arguments in support of it. 1. It prevents one party from raiding the other party in the hope of nominating weaker candidates in the other party. 2. It helps make candidates more responsive to the party, its platform, and its members. And 3. It helps make voters more thoughtful because they must choose between the parties in order to vote in the primaries. The critics of the closed primary contend that it compromises the secrecy of the ballot because it forces voters to make their party preferences known to the public, and it tends to exclude independent voters from the nominating process. Advocates of the open primary believe that their system of nominating addresses both of these criticisms. In many open primaries, voters are not forced to make their party preferences known in public, and the tendency to exclude independent voters is eliminated. The opponents of the open primary insist that it permits primary raiding, and it undercuts the concept of party loyalty and party responsibility. In most states, candidates need to win only a plurality of the votes cast in the primary to win their party's nomination. A plurality is the greatest number of votes won by any candidate, whether a majority or not. In 10 states, however, an absolute majority is needed to carry a primary. If no one wins a majority in the race, a runoff primary is held a few weeks later. In the runoff primary, the 2 top vote getters in the first party primary face one another, and the winner of that vote becomes the nominee. In most states, or nearly all of the elected school and municipal offices, are filled in nonpartisan elections. These are elections in which candidates are not identified by party labels. About half of all state judges are chosen on nonpartisan ballots as well. The nomination of candidates for these offices takes place on a nonpartisan basis too, often in nonpartisan primaries. Typically, a contender who wins a clear majority in a nonpartisan primary then runs unopposed in the general election, subject only to write-in opposition. In many states, however, a candidate who wins a majority in the primary is declared elected at that point. If there is no majority winner, the names of the top two contenders are placed on the general election ballot. The direct primary first appeared as a partisan nominating device. Many people have long argued that it is not well suited for use in nonpartisan elections. Instead, they favor the petition method, which you will read about later in this section. A number of criticisms have been leveled at the primary process. For example, in states that have a closed primary, many voters resent having to declare their party preferences. In those states where the typical open primary is used, many people are upset because they cannot express their choices for nominations in more than one party. Many voters are also annoyed by the bedsheet ballot. That is, the long list of candidates that typically appears in the primary ballot. They fail to understand that the use of the primary also automatically means a long ballot. These factors, combined with a lack of appreciation of the importance of primaries, results in this fact: voters' turnout in the primary elections in most states is usually less than half of that in general elections. As a further criticism, when two or more candidates seek the same nomination, primary campaigns can be quite expensive. The fact that successful contenders for the nomination must mount and find the money for yet another campaign for the general election adds to the money problems that so many candidates face. It is unfortunately true that the financial facts of political life in the United States mean that some well-qualified people do not seek public office simply because they cannot muster the necessary funds. The nominating process, whatever its form, can also have a very divisive effect on a party. Remember, the process takes place within a party. Because primaries are so public in nature, the direct primary magnifies the potential for division within the party. A bitter contest in the primaries can so wound and divide the party that it cannot recover in time to present a unified front for the general election. Many a primary fight has cost a party an election. Finally, because many voters are uninformed, the primary places a premium on name familiarity. That is, it often gives an edge to a contender who has a well-known name or a name that sounds like that of a well-known person. This occurs even though name familiarity in and of itself has little to do or nothing to do with a candidate's qualification. Obviously, the primary is not without its problems, nor is any other nominating device. Still, it does give a party's members the opportunity to participate at the very core of the political process. The presidential primary developed as an offshoot of the direct primary. It is not a nominating device, however. Rather, the presidential primary is an election that is held as one part of the process by which presidential candidates are chosen. The presidential primary is a very complex process. It is one or both of two things, depending on the state involved. It is a process in which a party's voters elect some or all of a state's party organization's delegates to that party's national convention, and/or it is a preference election in which voters can vote their preference among various contenders for a party's presidential nomination. Much of what happens in presidential politics in the early months of every 4 year centers on this very complicated process. For an extended discussion of the presidential primary, we're going to be looking at this in Chapter 13. One other nominating method is used fairly widely at the local level in American politics today: nomination by petition. Where this process is used, candidates for public office are nominated by means of petitions signed by a certain required number of qualified voters in the election district. Nomination by petition is found most widely at the local level, chiefly for nonpartisan school posts and municipal offices in medium-sized and smaller communities. It is also the process usually required by state law for nominating minor party and independent candidates. Remember, the states often purposely make the process of getting on the ballot difficult for those candidates. The details of the petition process vary widely from state to state, and even from one city to the next. Usually, however, the higher the office and/or the larger the constituency represented by the office, the greater the number of signatures needed for nomination.